This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. This is podcast episode 215. For those of you in the United States, a happy Thanksgiving. Joining us from Poland are Paweł Maslowski and Bart Ociesa, head brewer, Bart, and managing director, Paweł, of Pinta. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Welcome.
Hi, Jamie. Pleasure. Thank you. Nice to be here.
And I guess you are Browar Pinta, not Brewery Pinta, right?
Yeah, Browar, yeah.
I'm going to struggle through my pronunciations through this, and I'm going to count on you all to help me and help every American brewer making some of these beers pronounce everything correctly so that we can get this all correct. It's early for me. It's a little later in the afternoon for you all, and we are going to talk about brewing everything from Baltic Porter to Groats, barrel projects, because you all have engaged in brewing a lot of spirits, barrel-aged beers, imperial stouts, barley wines, etc. And I mean, heck, you guys are making some pretty compelling, hazy, contemporary American style, New England style IPAs. We can even talk a little bit about that, because what a beautiful broad world of beer we live in now, where breweries everywhere are being inspired by each other, and it's moving in these multiple directions. Before we do that, for nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. G&D stands alone as the only chiller manufacturer with an in-house team of installers and engineers with 30 years of real-world field labor experience in breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Contact the Total Glycol System Design experts today at gdchillers.com. Also, support for this episode comes from BSG Craft Brewing, announcing a cool new product offering. T45 lupulin-enriched hop pellets. More efficient than T90's T45 hop pellets contain a higher concentration of aromatic oils and bittering resins with a reduced level of polyphenols and plant material. This means a big, delicious hop flavor with fewer pounds per barrel, creating a more cost-efficient and sustainable beer production thanks to reduced wort losses. Supplies are limited. Secure your order today at go.bsgcraft.com/T-45. So Bart and Paul, welcome to the podcast. You'll listen to the podcast, and we've had over the last year and a half had some great conversations on the backside. It has manifested itself in our June-July issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. You talked to us about brewing a hoppy Baltic Porter, such a fantastic, curious, interesting way to take a traditional style from where you are in Poland and add a contemporary modern twist on it. Love that you all are pushing interesting boundaries in that world of brewing within a very traditionally minded brewing area. Talk to me about that history of Pinta and how you all both got into brewing.
Okay, so maybe I'll start.
This is Paul speaking, so that people can follow at home.
So the Browar Pinta was launched 10 years ago. Firstly as a contract brewery, and it is said to be the first craft brewery here in Poland. It was the first to brew an hop forward IPA. So it's like it is a date that started the craft beer revolution in Poland, and since that we grew. We opened our own facility 2 years ago. And yeah, we are still growing and brewing more and more beers.
Yeah, so it's Bart here now. So I ended up in Pinta about 3 years ago. Before that, I was working a little bit in New Zealand. My background is finance, so completely something different. But I decided to quit the huge corporation and work as an accountant, and leave it to pursue my traveling passion. So I was traveling a bit, and then started working in New Zealand for a couple of breweries. And then actually I got guys from Pinta to 8 Wired Brewing in New Zealand to brew a Baltic Porter. together there. And that's how I met with the guys, and they basically proposed me a job when I'll be ready and I'll be back in Poland. So I came back and started working for them in 2018. For Paul, it was a little aerial, actually.
I'm working in Pinta for 6 or 7 years, I believe. I started as a home brewer. Then I had an internship in a local brewery, and this local brewery in my hometown was a brewery that Pinta was contracting. And after about a year of internship there, I started to work for Pinta. And then we also moved to the second contract brewery, and then we started building up the big brewery. And since then I'm with them.
Yeah. How many hectoliters per year now does Pinta produce? And I'm going to call it in hectoliters because that's a measurement that you
we
can...
are prepared.
We are prepared to see. So this year we will brew roughly 25,000 hectoliters, which is 21,000 barrels per year. Yeah.
So it's a good-sized brewery, but the idea was you all got started, or as Pinta got started 10 years ago, was to focus on, and I think it's interesting that you define it as craft compared to not craft, that there are still small local breweries, but within Poland, some might consider them, even if they are the size that might be considered craft in the United States, they wouldn't consider themselves craft brewers. How do you all in Poland make that distinction?
So if you take a look at the law, the small brewery is anything below 200,000 hectoliters. So this is actually a very high limit. But if you take a look at how actually it looks, it's like we were the first brewery and we are now the biggest craft brewery. And it looks like we are still pushing the limits of what big the craft brewery can be. So our goal is not to grow more than 50,000 a year. So that's, let's say, our limit.
Yeah, there's a limit of a brewery we are currently in. So the brew house we have won't be able to brew more than 50,000 hectoliters. Yeah, and the distinction is very vague in Poland. There's no such thing as a law, and it says that this brewery is craft or not. It strictly depends on products the brewery is producing. If they are, if they are true, if they are distinct from macro breweries. If they are hop forward or some historical styles, and then the customers consider this brewery a craft brewery.
It's more of a cultural association of a definition than it is. Yeah, sure. As the brewery got started 10 years ago, making hop forward beers and making these beers inspired by craft brewers in other parts of the globe, How was that taken by local consumers? I think it's an interesting piece, bringing styles like this that might feel contemporary or new or current in other places, and bringing it to an audience that has a very familiar and long-standing relationship with beer and a fixed idea of what that might be.
So I think that the most customers back then, they were the guys who were home brewing. So for them, it was something completely new, something that they can try to brew at home. And, the guys 10 years ago, they started with an American IPA, which actually calls the Hop Attack. But then they started to make all of these different styles of beers like Schwarzbier or Grodziskie, or Bock or bitter or whatever. So basically, first few years it was just making basically all of the styles that they could, so the people can learn about different styles of beers. Because on the market there was pretty much nothing. It was a desert, just a cheap Euro lager, and that's it. So and obviously they were surprised by the price, because it was like 3 times more expensive than the Euro lager. But basically till this day we are sold out with everything, so looks like there is a market. which is good for us.
It's a very similar motivation that American homebrewers making beer styles expressed back, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, making the things that just weren't available on the market there for them. It's interesting to watch how that same dynamic, takes place everywhere. In terms of seeking out inspiration for the beers that Pinta brews, there's of course, this kind of combination of lesser brewed styles from a European canon of beer. There are these, American and or American-based kinds of styles like, hop forward beers that have pushed in that kind of realm. How does Pinta, balance those kinds of influences and find the inspiration for making this broad range, but with a character that feels like Pinta?
So at the moment, I think more than 75% of our beers are actually IPAs. So we definitely a hop-forward brewery, but we are also like to keep with the tradition. So we every year we make a Baltic porter, we make a Grodziskie, we make a Rauch beer, but definitely the most of it is IPAs, and we definitely take the inspiration from United States, obviously. But we do try to keep in touch with the old styles.
There's a beautiful undercurrent of hops that I find that drives everything from and I did some research and drank some of the Imperator Baltiki bottles last night to kind of dive in, and was fascinated by them. Let's talk a little bit about that. But before we do, a brewery might have 99 problems, but your fruit supplier shouldn't be one. Old Orchard is already known for their quality concentrates, but they also pride themselves on consistent product and reliable supply. When brewers need assistance, Old Orchard is just an email, phone call, or even a text away. Based in Greater Grand Rapids, Michigan, better known as Beer City, USA, Old Orchard is core to the brewing community. To join their fruit family, learn more at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, are you ready to brew like a pro? ProBrew has the equipment, systems, and technology to take your brewery production to the next level. Check out www.probrew.com for ProCarb inline carbonation technology, ProFill rotary filling and seaming can fillers, the Alchemator inline alcohol separation system, 7 to 50 barrel brew houses, and more. ProBrew offers the craft beer industry innovative solutions to help you brew like a pro. Go to www.probrew.com for more information. What I love, of course, brewing in Poland, there are other Baltic porters on the market. To create a beer that somehow stood out and would somehow merit both attention and, as you mentioned, a price that might be 3 times more than a consumer was willing to pay for that from another brewery in that kind of market, you have to have a selling point. There has to be a hook to capture people. And for you, it seems like that hook was hops, using hop flavor to, in this broader spectrum. Talk to me a little bit about, and obviously you all weren't necessarily involved in the very earliest design of that beer, but you can talk to me about the evolution of how that beer has also kind of come along. But let's talk about the construction of that Imperial, Baltic Porter and how you all have worked to build a hoppy idea that's both bitter and fruity at the same time, capturing these kinds of hop flavors.
Yeah, so with Imperator Bałtycki, it's actually quite similar story as with Atak Milo, the first IPA. So we wanted to make something different because in Poland, even the biggest commercial breweries are brewing Baltic porters like on a regular basis. So first point was to brew something bigger. So we increased the Plato from 18, the usual, to 25. And the second point was to use a lot of hops. So the base is basically just a regular Baltic porter, just way bigger. So lots of Munich, Vienna, Pilsner malt, something like dark crystal malt, and a touch of Carafa Special too. So it's fairly simple. And then just fermentation with W3470 and lots of hops, both on the hot side and dry hop.
Yeah, yeah. Brewing a big lager like this, with lager yeast, obviously poses an interesting challenge. There's time involved. Healthy fermentation is absolutely key to build a base that can support these kinds of flavors. How do you make sure that, especially brewing a 25 Plato dark lager with 3470, that you achieve the kind of outcomes that you hope for?
As Bartek told earlier, we also have a lager in our portfolio as a core beer. So we brew lagers almost all the time. So it's we just finish a smaller beer. It's a Pilsner style, Czech Pilsner style beer, and then we crop the slurry and use it for a stronger beer. So we have almost always healthy, big dosage of yeast to ferment Baltic porters or imperial porters. So that's not a problem for us. We also use yeast nutrient, and then we have 2-3 months of fermentation plus lagering plus dry hopping.
And we actually start with fairly low temperature, so we start around 9 Celsius, and then just give it a time to ferment, and then just to lager. So the fermentation wasn't really a problem. 25 Plato is like doable for those yeast to make it a clean, nice fermentation. So yeah, just have a fresh slurry, start low, give some nutrients, and it'll be fine.
What does that fermentation dynamic look like in terms of time? How long does it take? How much activity do you find initially? And then, does it hit a peak and then slow? What does that dynamic look like?
As Bart told, we start quite low with temperature, 8.5-9 degrees. So we dose a lot of yeast slurry, so we have first signs of fermentation in about 24 hours. What we usually do also is that we don't brew one batch. We knock out 2 or 3 batches into one vessel periodically about 1 day later. So we start with lower amount of beer, and then we hit with another portion of fresh wort. So the yeast have enough time to settle in the environment. And then after about 3 or 4 days in a lower temperature, when the activity is of course a little bit slower, but it's seen, we start rising up at temperature about 1 degree Celsius per day. So we stop in about 14-15 degrees, and it's I think we are finished with fermentation in about 10 days. So it's quite a healthy fermentation.
So it's roughly 2 Plato a day, you should say.
Is there, in terms of a healthy yeast slurry, do you have a goal for cells?
No,
cell concentration?
Not really.
No,
not really. You just see how the previous beer was going. So, yeah.
And I, as you say, since you're doing sequential brews and filling that tank, but pitching after that, that first fill, you're growing your yeast as you fill that tank and you go along. As you mash through this, are there any techniques that you all are using in order to create a more fermentable wort for this yeast to work on?
We have a 50 hectoliter brew house. Its barrels is 42 and a half barrels, so it's quite big. We have a very wide lot at hand, so we can fill it up to the top with malt. So we don't do double mashes or something like that. With this beer, we need to do this for a beer of about 30 Plato plus. So for 25, only traditional mashing, temperature control, German style. So, start quite low, then temperature will rise to certain points. So for this beer, we mash in about 56 degrees centigrade. Then we have a 1 hour period in 64, and then we raise the temperature to 72 for 20 minutes, and then mash out. So, and when we want to achieve a 25 degrees Plato, we just boil it out for about 3 to 4 hours. So we have a 25 degrees Plato wort. Then we hop it, knock it out to the whirlpool, and then knock it out to the fermenter.
I'll be completely honest with you. With that amount of hops and such a big beer, if we do a step mash or not, it doesn't really matter at all.
Fair. Having just built this larger production brewery a couple of years ago, you all, I think, have a benefit to knowing the kinds of beers you're making and being able to build a system that can handle those. And it does sound like you've done that knowing that this is going to be, a piece of what you brew. And now you have also taken a lot of those bigger, beer brewing strategies and applied that to barrel-aged beers too. We'll talk about that in a minute, but I do want to talk about this approach, to hops themselves in Baltic Porter. From a creative standpoint, how did Pinta find itself drawn to building an using these Pacific Northwest American hops to create a different kind of flavor in Baltic Porter? It is truly from an American perspective, looking at a Baltic Porter that uses Citra, Mosaic, Eldorado, Centennial in the mix, it just sounds strange. And yet as I was drinking them, you can understand it that oftentimes these chocolate and citrus and fruity flavors, they do work together. They don't clash. They can be complementary if they're used well together. So talk to me about how you all have honed this flavor idea and built these kinds of complementary pieces with hop flavor in this bigger Imperial Baltic Porter.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, it might sound weird, but I think it's like you in US are looking for a traditional European style, so brewing a traditional porters. And we have so many traditional Baltic porters that we just need to make something different. So we thought that using the hops that are really, like you said, citrusy, orangey, zesty, a touch of tropical fruits, it actually pairs really well with all those chocolate, dried fruits, caramel flavors from the base of the Baltic porters. So the idea behind the hops was just to choose the ones that are really citrusy and just a little bit of tropical fruits at the end, just to complement the aromas and the taste from the base of the porter.
They seem, as I was tasting them, also to add almost a kind of woody, earthy element, in addition to that, which again creates additional layers because the base beer may not be, and there's some of those light caramel flavors through the beer that also help underscore that. To me, as I was tasting it, I mean, I think you could probably put that beer next to a American black IPA or Cascadian dark ale, especially one that's on that higher imperial end of the spectrum. And there's a big similarity between those. They're not that far apart in terms of how those flavors come through, which makes it really attractive to me because I miss the black IPAs that American brewers have seemed to stop making as of late. Bring them back. Having said that, being able to structure that means, finding the right hops characters out of it. Talk to me about your process of finding the right blend of hops. You all have been producing, you have a new version with Strata and Sabro using, this newer evolution of hops. How have you gone about, you talk to me about the creative process in thinking about how hops work and building a hoppy approach to that, especially newer iterations of it?
Yeah, so the newer iteration from the last year with Strata and Sabro, we wanted to make something different again. The 3 years ago, we made a barrel-aged version, and last year we wanted to make something with hops again, and the whole new varieties of the hops last year and 2 years ago is just booming now. So we have so many different new hops to try, and for me, using Sabro and Strata was pretty obvious choice. It's a black beer with lots of caramel chocolate flavors and also this dried fruits, and Sabro with its coconutty flavor and Strata with the passion fruit. It sounds like just like a perfect dessert match. So for me those two are the most prominent new hops. So it was quite obvious, and I think the hop profile was just matching perfectly with the base again. So it was nice to see, and just to release two of the Imperator Bałtycki side by side, and the only difference was just the dry hop, and you even see how they changed the base and how they changed the body of the beer just by influencing all those coconut flavors, and it's changing the whole beer. So it was really, really interesting. I think this year we're gonna also think about some nice combination.
It's interesting what you just said, that it impacts other elements of the beer. Do you mean that from like a texture and mouthfeel category, or is that also just the way that it highlights other elements that the malt and fermentation might otherwise produce?
So basically, if just to explain, so we make one batch of Imperator Bałtycki. We use the same hops for the Whirlpool, and then we divide it in two different tanks, and we use different hops for the dry hop. So the one with Sabro and Strata, for me, the body was way thicker than the regular version. I think it was just my conscience, and the passion fruit coconut flavors just work that way. But if you drink it in a blind tasting, you will say that those two are completely different base beers. So I think it's not really changing anything in like chemical physical way. It's just your impression because of those aromas is completely different.
That's really interesting that it could impact the way that you even think about the texture of the beer itself just from that simple hop change. As you're dry hopping these beers, is there anything to the technique that you found helps get the most out of those hops?
So with this one, for all of our beers, we are using a dry hopnik. So it's a kind of a separate pump with a small vessel to inject the hops. And with Imperator Bałtycki, we are actually dry hopping in a really low temperatures after all the yeast drop, and it's a lager. So I think it's you can definitely compare it to like cold IPA kind of way. So it's really, really clean fermentation and a nice Baltic Porter base, and then you have all the resources just to show the hops when it's cold. It's not we are not keeping hops for too long on the beer, so it's basically just like after you dry hop, it's 1-2 days and you drop the hops, and that's it. So a short contact, low temperatures.
Do you find that compared to dry hopping lower ABV beers, that doing this beer, which I think it's around 10% alcohol by volume, and by our U.S. measure, that it has a different effect as you're dry hopping at that kind of higher alcohol rate?
Yeah, definitely. It does have a different. It's a completely different way, and also like the base beer is. It's quite big and like malty, and there's lots of flavors in the base beer. So the hops are working completely different than in the IPA or black IPA even.
Yeah. Water is an important piece of this also in order to kind of achieve the soft feel that you are pushing for. Talk to me a little bit about how you approach water in this beer.
Okay, so this is Baltic Porter is a malty beer. So we, as Bartek told, we have a very traditional approach to the malt bill, to the lagering technique, and also to showing the attributes of German hops, German malts, Polish malts. So we use a ratio of about 2:1 for chlorides. Just to show the maltiness of the beer. What's more, we also check the pH, especially for these dark and strong beers. It can be a little bit too lower, and it's astringent after a while. So we always have some chalk on site during the boiling, just to check the pH in the range of about 5.1, 5.3 in the end of boiling. So we don't want it to go too low because of the black malts or longer boil. This is very important for a final taste of a beer because of the higher bitterness and the big dry hopping, and also a lot of black malts, dark calmer malts. You don't want this astringent, almost sour note to the beer. It must be, well balanced with the maltiness and the hops also.
Sure, lower pH would certainly, especially with beers that are this hoppy, impact the way that the hops themselves express, because pH definitely has that kind of impact. Sure. Let's change gears and talk about some other beer styles. But before we do that, this episode is brought to you by Mountain Rose Herbs, purveyors of the highest quality organic herbs, spices, and teas. Whether you want to add depth to your next golden triple with classic notes of cinnamon, pepper, and clove, or artfully layer exotic, zesty grains of paradise into a perfect ale, adding botanicals to your brewing is an easy way to customize a delicious flavor profile. Mountain Rose Herbs has been providing organic herbs and spices to chefs, herbalists, and dedicated brewers for more than 3 decades. Learn more at mountainroseherbs.com and get 10% off any and all orders with the code CRAFTBEER10. Also, as a brewery owner, you know how important it is to keep your machines running so you don't have to deal with the hassle caused by contamination, recalls, and downtime. Clarion makes food-grade lubricants to protect your equipment from the wear and tear that results in breakdowns that cut into your bottom line. Clarion gives you peace of mind so you can focus on what you do best, pouring out great-tasting beverages. Learn more at www.clarionlubricants.com. Another beer that you all sent over my way, which I just had the pleasure of drinking as I was recording a couple weeks ago with Stan Hieronymus, is one of his favorite beer styles. Stan, obviously the author of Hops, Brew Like a Monk, and a bunch of other books, wrote a critics list for our Best in Beer issue. And pronounce it for me.
Grodziskie.
Grodziskie.
Yeah.
I'm going to. This is one of the reasons that we're talking right now, because I can take your pronunciation and commit it to memory, and I will pronounce it correctly from now on. It's clearly one of Stan's favorite styles. It's something that you all have moved, and taken and brewed consistently now also. Talk to me about taking this style, aka the Polish champagne, a beer that some American brewers like Live Oak and others have jumped on, Chuck and Nut. We've had some great iterations made in the United States. Yours, as Stan and I were drinking both versions, the anniversary version and your regular release version, were struck by how intense it was. There is a much more intense approach to that flavor than some American brewers might brew that beer with. But walk me through the design, the history of this beer, and how you all found an inspiration for how you were going to brew it.
So the history is quite interesting because basically for almost 20 years, the Grodziskie was gone. No one was brewing Grodziskie in Poland. I believe there were some breweries in the United States brewing Grodziskie at that time, but there was no one in Poland. And even before Pinta, 2 owners of Pinta decided to brew Grodziskie on a contract basis in one of the restaurant breweries. And they brewed 1,600 bottles. And it was the first beer before Pinta, which actually, made them to open Pinta brewery. So it was really, really interesting. And since then, we are brewing Grodziskie every year, sometimes twice a year. And the beer itself, Paul?
Yeah, the beer itself is also very traditional in approach. So we try to stick exactly to what was the parameters of a historic beer. So it's very light. It's only 7.8 Plato. It's also light in alcohol. It's about 2.5 per percent volume. And we also use traditional methods of grain bill, mashing, and boiling, and also hop usage. So we use only wheat malt that is smoked with oak.
Right.
We use 100% of it. We only
Where do you get this malt?
The Weiermann malting company is making this malt on a regular basis. Some breweries in Poland just smoke their own malt for a different characteristics or intensity. Historically, this beer was not. It was dried over oak smoke, not malted. So, it was lower in intensity. But we have available wheat smoked malt, so we use it. It's a 100% of a grain bill. And apart from that, we use Polish hops. In this case, we use Lubelski variety. It's an aromatic hop of about 5% alpha acids. So, and we use quite a lot of it just to hit about 25 IBUs. For the beer. So for this low and this dry beer, the bitterness is quite firm.
Sure, for a 2.5% ABV beer to have a 25 IBU, it's
you can feel it definitely.
Right, especially with that much smoke component on top of it. Are there other methods that you will use to kind of balance out that bitterness and smokiness?
So I think the one of the most important things is carbonation. So it needs to be really high. Basically, we are going as high as we can with our technology here. But back in the days, it was re-fermented in a bottle, and it was even more carbonated than we can do now. So that's where the name comes from, the Polish champagne. It should be really, really refreshing and really with high carbonation.
What in terms of volumes, what's your goal for carbonation?
At the moment, it's around 2.6, 2.7, but it can be.
Historically, it was higher.
Yeah,
for sure. This is our top we can pour with a bottling line.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about carbonation as such an ingredient in the beer and balancing out, but also that much carbonation produces, it creates, carbonic acid is an acid, and that also becomes a flavor component of the beer. Again, as I start thinking about this, it seems like there's so many things that could go wrong between the phenolic smoke component, between the high bitterness level, between this kind of, the high amount of carbonic acid now in the beer through this high carbonation. How, again, do you build some sort of soft buffering element to make this, or is there something to that malt itself that just lends, some sort of sweeter edge or softer edge to it?
Yeah, I think from what you described, it should be very unbalanced beer, but in fact, it's very refreshing. And I think balance and, smoky, bitter, and, highly carbonated doesn't seem to be very very refreshing product. But I think the 100% usage of wheat malt is something that gives this beer, like a velvety texture, pillowy texture, and it's also bready and tasty, and this is the component that makes you have another sip of a beer. So it's always a malty, bready beverage, and I think this is very interesting in this beer.
I think that also the malts, they need to be really fresh or freshly smoked. We've tried so many different smoked malts, and not all of them are that intensive. So we are fortunate enough to have Weiermann close by.
Right.
So the Weiermann wheat's smoked malt is pretty awesome. So that's definitely a really important thing. But also the meshing and the clean fermentation, as usual, pretty much.
Yeah. As you're brewing it, are there any challenges that you routinely find yourselves having to overcome through that production process, or are there any small pieces that you've learned that help make it more successful?
I think it both for a homebrew and a commercial brewer, brewing, having it's an ale, so we use our own yeast strain, and this is a very low ABV beer, so the fermentation for us is very, very fast. So after about 2 days we are done with it. So the most challenging part for us is to have this because we have a naturally carbonated beers. It's to find the point where you should close the valve and naturally carbonate the beer, and this is a very short period when you can close it because the fermentation goes so fast. So this may be a challenging for a commercial. For a homebrew, you can use carbonation in a bottle, and it's not that big a problem.
That is interesting. I hadn't thought about that. But as you're spunding a tank, that in a 2.5% beer, there's a very small window for that.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Who comes in overnight to make sure that happens at the right time?
We always have someone here, so it's not
to check the beer. Yeah.
Sure. So and as we tasted the beers, as Stan and I were tasting the beers, there was an interesting difference between the anniversary edition that you brewed and the kind of regular edition. Talk to me about the kind of ways that you've built some variety in Grodz itself.
Yeah, so I'm interested. What was the difference actually? Because there was a year apart, the bottling, so
and
they should be
completely the same recipe. Other than that,
yeah.
I think that as I tasted it, it felt more. The anniversary edition felt like it had a more definition. That it was a little, I wouldn't call it, maybe a touch like more crisp, but it had a more defined edge in that flavor, whereas the younger version felt like it was maybe just a touch fruitier and and more broad and maybe a little bit more expansive. And so, yeah.
That's really interesting because it's basically the same beer with the same recipe. They're just a year apart, but as you can see, like even if it's such a small, tiny beer, the smokiness can age really well. So it's like with bigger beers, it's just they're just changing in time, and even after a year, it's still like drinkable, and even as you said, even better after a year. So the base recipe was exactly the same. It's just 1 year difference.
We also had an older edition from another brewery. I won't name any names, and it had not held up as well as yours had over that past year. So there's something to that, but it also started as a less smoky beer, and for whatever reason, wherever they are sourcing that oak smoked wheat malt, different source, different expression in the beer. Everyone brewing these in the United States is having to figure out where to get those. The Live Oak folks get theirs from Europe and bring it in. I'm not sure where Chuckanut or Dovetail or some of these others that are brewing theirs are getting theirs. But nonetheless, all of those different sources of malt are going to create a different kind of expression and maybe produce a different level of smoke expression in a beer, given that that's all you can brew with. It is an interesting one as people think about smoked beer in the United States. They think 100% smoked malt, and they think that's crazy. Why would you ever do that? But the impression of smoke as we drink it doesn't work, I think, in a linear fashion. That the difference between 10 or 20% smoked malt and 50 or 80%, it's not just a linear step up. There's a point at which I think that smoke character pretty much hits a saturation, and then even if you're adding more, it's not like it necessarily gets perceived as quote unquote more smoky. As you all have brewed with it, how do you find that works in different percentages of smoked malt? Obviously, it's always going to be 100% in this beer, but as you work with it, do you think about it in those kinds of terms?
Yeah, I think that we must remember that this is a pretty it's a small table beer, so it's only 7.8 Plato. So you don't use a lot in the terms of pounds or kilograms. You don't use a lot of malt to achieve only 7 Plato beer. So when we are thinking about Rauch Doppelbox of Bamberg, so there is a difference when you use for example 500 kilos and 1 ton and 500 kilos. So for sure more phenolic compounds would go to the beer. So for a Grodziskie, when you use a very small amount of the sweet smoked malt, it's not that intense comparing to Rauch lagers of Bamberg or I don't know smoked porters from America. It's a different beer because it's very very small in ABV.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But again, I think the quality of the malts is really important because we had smoked porters that we brewed with 40% of smoked malt, and it wasn't smoky at all. And then we did a similar one with the different malts, different company, and it was super smoky. So the quality of the malts is one of the most important things here.
That makes sense. As we're getting on here, I want to make sure that we can talk about some of the progressive projects. You all have also just launched Pinta Barrel, a kind of barrel-focused brewery to make spirit barrel aged beers. Talk to me about this program. Some of the beers that you sent our way were some fantastic collaborations with some very hip brewers here in the United States, and so clearly you are drawing some inspiration and also kind of following this pathway that some American barrel aged brewers are following. Talk to me about finding that inspiration and building some beers that feel like Pinta, but that also can play in this barrel aged stout and barley wine realm.
Yeah, so Pinta Barrel is a new project. We started it actually 2 years ago. We've opened a crowdfunding campaign. So all the funds we actually got from the people to build the brewery. And it's a separate building, separate installation. It's in the same kind of place, but still the separate buildings, separate companies, but same people. And this brewery is focused 100% on barrel-aged beers. It's a tiny installation, only 10 hectoliters, so it's roughly 8 barrels, I would say, maybe 9. Just a few fermenters, but the most important thing is 2 separate warehouses, one for the wild fermentation and one for the clean fermentation, with a separate air control, temperature control, humidity, etc. And in each one of them we can fit around 300 barrels. So at the moment we are actually just starting to put the new barrels on. I hope we're gonna start brewing next month, maybe even a little earlier. And the plan is to release roughly 15 to 20 beers a year. Like you mentioned, some of them in a collaboration with the really well-known breweries. And yeah, that's the plan. So we'll see how it goes.
Is there a market for spirit barrel-aged stouts and barley wines in Europe, or is this just something that you are helping to and hoping to create?
I think there is a market. It's a small market, but there is a market.
And when I say that, it wasn't like there was some market for it in the United States when brewers started doing this in the 1990s and then mid-2000s. No one even knew what those were going to be, and they just started making them, and they caught on. And so it's not as if there has to be a pre-existing market. Yeah, that is interesting that there are, I'm sure, some beer geeks out there who like some of these things and have had small amounts of these, but again, as in that history of craft beer, just may not have ready access to them that you might be able to provide.
Yeah, so the whole barrel aging thing in Poland started around 5 years ago. So since then, the market grew, and also in Europe, there's a lot of breweries having a separate barrel aged projects like Mikkeller or Tuwol, or there's a lot of barrel aging in Pohjola brewery. So there's quite a few breweries making barrel aged beers, and also Belgium is really close by. So our wild part will be lambic inspired part. So I think in Europe there won't be any problem with finding people willing to buy those beers. You can see it on the festivals. People are going just for the barrel aged stuff, and the IPAs and sours go after those. So yeah, I think there is a market, and the brewery, the barrel project is 10 times smaller than the big brewery. So it's kind of like a small toy just for fun. So, you know.
One of the keys, though, is finding a voice, for those beers. On the clean side of barrel-aged beers, where have you found, a way to make those barrel-aged beers feel like Pinta beers? Talk to me about some of that creative process and how you have formulated an idea for those so that they don't just feel like everybody else's beers, they're going to feel like Pinta beers.
Yeah, so at the beginning, when we made our first barrel-aged beer as Pinta, it was some years ago, most of the breweries in Poland, and same as we did, it was just a beer that we normally release to the market, a base beer, and we put it into the barrel and see what happens. We don't really blend, we don't do anything with it. We just buy the barrels and keep the fingers crossed it's going to be fine. So it was like that for a long, long time. But with this project, we wanted to, let's say, go professional with it. So we want to have a big stock, and we want to have the blending part as a main part of the process. So I think I can't answer you at the moment what is the thing, what is the Pinta thing in those beers, because we haven't blended that many beers yet. But I hope there will be a thing. And I think that the inspiration that's coming from US and also from this collaboration that we brew with the guys from US, it's a big thing. So the clean part is mainly inspired by US, and the wild part is inspired by Belgium, of course. And we also have some collaboration with the Belgian breweries. So for me, this is the beginning of the learning process. How to brew those beers, how to blend those beers, where to source the barrels, how to make the recipes for the barrel-aged beers, not just for the beers. So I think it's a very, very beginning of the process. Hopefully we can see in a few months or a few years how it's going to go.
Sure. Well, let's zoom out here at the end and talk about the big picture. What is the big picture goal for Pinta? And, you mentioned earlier that 50,000 hectoliters or 50,000 barrels, about that top end of where you'd like to go. What are the next things that are getting Pinta excited about brewing? And obviously, I think the barrel program is going to be one of those. But what's in the near term, and what is the bigger long term goal for the brewery?
So I think the long term in terms of production is those 50,000 hectoliters, as you said. We'll see how it goes. When we grew to 50,000 hectoliters, I think we're gonna grow like more horizontally, as you say. And the next few months, maybe a few years, we have in plans to build a huge distribution center just close by, and also our tap room here at the brewery. So we want to make it a place where people can actually come and spend a day or half a day. And it's in between the mountains in the middle of nowhere. So it will be great to make people come here for a beer. It's not that obvious in Poland. There's actually no breweries with tap rooms. So it will be a really great success for us if we make a place where the people will come and drink our beer by the brewery.
Well, fantastic. I may just have to come and visit. That seems like a great place to close. G&D Chillers will engineer your glycol piping for free. Try T45 hops from BSG. Craft juice concentrates from Old Orchard are the cost-effective solution for your fruit-forward needs. ProBrew offers innovative solutions to the brewing community. Get 10% off your next order from Mountain Rose Herbs with code CRAFTBEER10 and make your system 100% food safe with Clarion lubricants. If you'd like to support this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com. Click on that subscribe button. We bring you great brewing content from folks like Pinta. And in fact, if you would like a homebrew skilled recipe of their Baltic Porter recipe, go to that June-July 2021 issue of Craft Beer and Brewing. It is free it's included with your subscription, but only subscribers can read that recipe. Paul and Bart, thank you all for joining me on the podcast. If people want to learn more about Pinta, where do they find you all?
We have a website and also a very active Facebook page. So everything is there. Every new beer is introduced, and also some other information about our crew and our current beers. So
Facebook at Browar Pinta and Instagram on pinta.craft.beer. Yeah, that's the
Fantastic.
place.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing your beers and thanks for sharing your insights on brewing with our audience. Cheers.
Thanks, Jamie. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.